Hello everyone, welcome back to MalStorm Gaming. My name is Malachi Gardner. Today I'm going to be reviewing Enchanters, the card drafting game by Gindi Games. So in this video, similar to my other review videos, I'm not actually going to be going through in detail on all the mechanics and rules of Enchanters. If you don't already know what Enchanters is, or would like to know more about it, I would recommend watching my playthrough video. There should be a link up here to the first video where you can watch me explain the game and then play through a solo game using the Automa deck, and that'll really give you a good feel for how the game works. This video is purely just going to be my thoughts on the game. I've already done a playthrough, like I said, as well as an unboxing video if you'd like to see all the content that comes in the all-in pledge. So let's get into my thoughts, starting with some pros. So one thing I really like with Enchanters is all of the variety that you have. Now, like I said earlier, I do have the all-in pledge, which means that I have a lot of stuff for Enchanters, but even if you just have one of the core sets, I believe there's 3 core sets at this point in time, you can kind of mix the content together. Even if you just have one of them, you have 6 factions, you have 6 kingdoms, which are the different factions in the game. And you are generally going to use 4. Sometimes you use 3, but you're generally going to use 4 of these kingdoms per game. And you have, even with just 6, you have quite a few combinations there. Now, if you have the all-in, like me, you're going to have something closer to like 22 kingdoms. I don't remember the exact number, but it's somewhere around there. And that just means that you're going to have a ton of combinations. Each of the kingdoms functions very differently. There are some that like share some similarities to each other, but they're all distinct from each other, and getting the different combinations of them mixed together will allow you to create some really cool weapons and fight against some really cool enemies, and it's different every time. In addition to that, the all-in pledge comes with somewhere close to 60 village cards, and you're only using 1 village card each game, and then if you'd like to be using the overlords, there's something like 40 of those. And again, you're only using 1 of those each game. Mix everything, plus all the extra modules, stuff that you can add in, like the quests and the events and the banners and classes and everything. Putting it all together, you have a ton of different setups, different combinations, and different cards that can come up each game. And there's just a ton of variety and tons of replayability. If you have been watching this channel for a period of time, then you will probably have noticed that I speak very highly of replayability, and replayability is very important to me, and this game has it in spades, so that's wonderful. That's the first thing I like, all the replayability and variety of content that you have. So the next thing I like about Enchanters is how the item crafting works. In the game, you're going to have 1 active enchantment and 1 active item at a time. Together, those are going to create your weapon. But the items and enchantments that you have near the beginning of the game are not going to be the ones that you're going to have by the end of the game. And this is because most of the cards you're going to be drafting throughout the game are going to be other items and enchantments. So when you take a new item or enchantment, you're going to cover up the previous card that you had of that type. Mostly. And what this means is that all of the information that is on the top 90% of the card is going to be removed from the game and is not going to impact the game at all. But the bottom 10% of the card is going to remain in effect. So there's this really interesting balance between, okay, do I want this card that is really powerful and gives me like 3 attack now, but as soon as I cover it up, all that attack is going to go away? Or would I rather get a card that makes me lose 3 attack right now, but after I cover it up, it's going to give me 3 attack? Or you could just take a balanced card where it gives me 1 attack permanently and then 1 attack temporarily. So that's all kind of cool. So I really like that mechanic. I like how when you take a new card, you're going to cover up the other cards, but some of it's going to stay in effect. You're going to lose some special abilities and stats, but you're also going to be able to retain some special abilities and stats. And so then as you take more and more items and enchantments, the residual effects on the previous cards that you had are going to add up until you are powerful enough to take down the dragons and overlords that are in the game. So I really like that part of the game. I also really like how the actual drafting works in the game. So you have 6 spaces lined up, and you're going to put cards in all those spaces, and each space is going to have a cost relative to where it is in the lineup. So the furthest card to the left is going to cost 0, and then 1, and the next card is going to cost 1, and then 2, 3, and all the way up to the rightmost card costing 5. So whenever you want to get a new card, you're going to need to pay a certain amount that is listed on the board, and that's how many crystals you're going to need to spend to get that card. Then you're going to shift all the cards from the right to the left, one space to fill in that gap you made, and then a new card is drawn from the deck and placed in the rightmost space. What this means is that then, if there's a card you want that currently costs 5, you can just pick a different card, and then it'll cost 4 on the next turn. On your opponent's turn, when they take a card, it'll slide down again, and now it'll cost 3 on your turn, so you save 2 gems. But what if your opponent also wanted that card? So you held off on getting it because you didn't want to spend 5 crystals for this card. So you picked a different card, maybe the card that's free, because that's always nice to take. Then it only costs 4 for your opponent. Then your opponent sees that, and they still want it, so they take the card. They pay the 4 because they don't want you to get it at a cost of 3. So the longer a card is on the table, it's going to get cheaper and cheaper. But if you want the card, you need to sometimes just take the card. If there's a card on the table that's for a very specific synergy that no one else is really going for, and then you can just allow the price to decrease so you can get it at a cheaper price. But if there's a card that someone else on the table wants, then you're in need of gauge, okay, does it make sense for me to take this card now at this high price, or should I wait and potentially get it at a lower price, but at the same time, someone else could also take that card that I wanted, and then I won't get it at all. So I really like how that mechanic works, and I think it's really fun to play and make those tough decisions. And then I also really like how high quality the components are. With one exception, the components are amazing. Both the basic cardboard tokens, as well as the new upgraded plastic tokens that come to Kickstarter. The cardboard is really thick, and it feels nice, has a nice linen finish. The cards feel wonderful with their linen finish, and just feels very high quality. The playmats are all really nice, and the plastic tokens are pretty cool. I like the gems especially. I've heard some people say that the wound tokens are slightly hard to read. I don't mind them too much, although I maybe would have preferred them to be like to be more like the crystals, where it's the actual like blood drop shape instead of the circle. But they're still pretty cool to use. But even if you don't want to use the plastic tokens, or you don't have the plastic tokens, the cardboard stuff is still really good. It feels really nice to use. So whether you have the cardboard stuff or the plastic stuff, it all feels great. The one complaint that I do have with the components is that some of the cards I've noticed have slightly different cuts. Some of them are slightly bigger than others, and this isn't really a game where you're going to be handling too many cards at the same time, luckily, so it's not like a deck building game where you're constantly going to be shuffling cards together and drawing hands of multiple cards. In this game, you're really going to be just taking one card from the center at a time, so it doesn't really bother me as much as it would in a different game. But when I set up the game, some of the cards for the kingdoms are different sizes, so I don't remember the exact factions, but it might be like the goblins are slightly bigger than the unicorns, and so when you shuffle those cards together, the goblins kind of stick out, and it just makes it a little bit annoying to shuffle. It's not the end of the world, but that's one complaint that I do have with the components, but everything else is really nice with the components, and it feels really nice to use. So those are some of my thoughts on the gameplay itself, the mechanics, everything in that, and the mechanics and the components and such. But now I'm going to go and talk about my thoughts on the 2 official solo variants. So the first one, and the one that I used in my playthrough, if you want to go check that out, is the Automa. And this is just a little deck of cards, and you're going to deal 1 card out at the beginning of the round, and it's going to have a little diagram of the journey track, and one of the cards in the diagram is going to have an X through it, and that is the card that the Automa takes. You're going to take that from the journey track, place it in a little discard pile, slide all the cards down, draw a new card, and now it's your turn. There are a few special abilities on the cards where you're able to rest and take some damage or pay some crystals or do some other effect to actually take the card that the Automa just took. So that way, if they took a card that you wanted, there is a way for you to get it back. But for the most part, it's just flip over a card, discard a card from the journey track, and then replenish the journey track like normal, and now it's your turn. The thing I love about this solo variant is that it feels just like a 2-player game. And you actually can use it in a 2-player game to play a 3-player game, or use it in a 3-player game to simulate playing a 4-player game. So it really is just functioning as an extra player, and the game really doesn't have much player interaction other than just taking the card that someone else wanted. And so this Automa deck does that really well. It just takes the cards that you may have wanted. There are some effects that you're not able to trigger using the Automa variant because little things like the Automa doesn't actually have attack. So if you wanted to play the trap card on the Automa, it doesn't do anything. But for the most part, you can just play the game like normal. Don't really have to worry about the Automa. The Automa's turns take 10 seconds, if that, and then you can just get on and play the game, and it feels just like a two-player game. So I really like that. Now, I have two gripes with the Automa. The first one is that the deck composition is kind of strange, where there's no card in the Automa deck that takes the card in the first space. I find that strange because the first card slot is free. And so you're saying the Automa never takes the free card. I just find that strange. And then it's really weighted towards the 5th and 6th slots, which means that on average you're going to be paying 4 or 5 crystals each turn. And they can afford that. And they never take the first free card. I just find that strange. That also means that if you have a card that you want, or a monster that you want to fight, but you're not quite ready for it, you can put it in the first slot and you know that the Automa is never going to touch that card. So it's just kind of strange. Doesn't really make sense to me. And because it's so common for them to be taking the expensive cards, much more common than it is for them to be taking the cheap cards, it just feels strange because then sometimes it is annoying where a new card comes out from the deck that you want, but it's too expensive for you to spend 5 crystals to get that card, and then the Automa just takes it on the next turn because they can get that for free. And I think that's why you have some of the cards that allow you to journey to the Automa's discard pile so that you can get those cards that kind of just got snatched out from underneath you. And so there is a way to mitigate that, but it just feels weird that they are going to very frequently be taking the expensive cards that you can rarely afford, and yet... Second thing that is that it is a beat-your-own-score type game mode where you're just trying to get a high score. The rulebook does say that if you get past a certain score, I believe it's like 50, then you win the game. And so that's kind of nice, but after you play the game several times, I find that I'm generally always getting a score of at least 50, sometimes even higher than 50. And so then it's like you kind of always just win, and now it is just beat your own score, just trying to play multiple times, and then every time you play, you're just trying to get a slightly higher score, which I know some people don't mind, but I do like to have an objective victory. Either I lost or I won. Not like, oh well, I didn't quite do as well as last time, and then the next game is, oh, I did slightly better this time. I don't really like that much. I want to either win or lose. Which brings me to the second solo variant that you can play with, and that's like the boss battler game mode, where you're going to need at least 2 characters. So you can't play it true solo with just one character like you can with the Automa. You're going to need a second character that you're going to be controlling. So you need to control 2 characters, but then you're going to be taking an Overlord and trying to beat him up before he beats you up. So I believe there are 6 different Overlords that come in the Odyssey expansion, and they are designed to be played in this game mode. There are also some other cards that are used as overlays to put over other Overlord cards to change their abilities so that those Overlords work in this game mode as well. So you have quite a few to choose from. How this works is the Overlord has a health dial which is set to 99, and you are able to deal damage to the boss by discarding the top card of any of your stacks and dealing damage to the boss equal to that card's victory point value. So if you defeated a monster that is worth 5 victory points, you place it in the monster column on your little player board, and then you're able to, as a minor action, discard that card and place it in the trash and then do 5 damage to the boss, adjusting his hit point dial. You can also do this to items and enchantments, but for the most part you are just going to be discarding monsters and dragons, and since it's a minor action, you can do this once per turn, so if you defeat a monster, you are able to just immediately discard it and deal damage to the boss. But then, to make things interesting, the Overlord has a deck of cards, and the deck is consisted of mostly generic cards that every Overlord is going to use in this game mode, but the 6 Overlords that came in the Odyssey expansion that are built specifically for this game mode, they have, I believe, 10 cards that are specific to them that are shuffled into this deck to make the game feel more distinct than when you're playing against any other Overlord. And then you're going to, at the beginning of the round, you're going to draw one of these cards from the Overlord deck and resolve its effects. There are 3 different tiers of abilities that the Overlord can possibly do, and they start in tier 1, and then as you deal damage to them, they're going to go up to tier 2, and then once you get their health even lower, it's going to go up to tier 3. And then the effects on the Overlord cards are going to become more and more powerful as you deal them more damage. So a tier 1 Overlord ability might say something like all of the monsters in the journey track get +2 attack for this turn. But then if the Overlord is in tier 2 or 3, then they each get +2 attack and 2 defense. I just made that card up, but that's kind of how it works. That is how the enemy is going to be attacking you, essentially, and then you're just discarding cards that are worth points to damage the boss, and you're trying to get his health down to 0 before he deals enough wounds to you to meet your wound threshold, which you set at the beginning of the game. The standard game mode is like 40, so you're trying to deal 99 damage to him before you gain a collective amount, before your party collectively gains 40 wounds. My biggest pro with this game mode is that it has an objective victory condition. You're trying to deal 99 damage to the boss, and he can heal and do different things like that, but you're just trying to beat him up, that's all. But you're just trying to defeat him. And you know for a fact if you've defeated him at the end of the game and won, or you know if you have been defeated by him and you lost. It's cut in stone. You either win or lose. It's not like the Automa where you're just trying to beat your own score. So I really like that a lot. And so I really enjoy that in this game mode. I think the game mode is pretty interesting to play, but is just very different. So the Automa feels just like a normal multiplayer game. This game mode feels very different. There's a lot of rule changes in this game mode. There are cards that function differently in this game mode, and you, as the players, have complete control over the journey track. So there's 2 to 4 players in a game against one Overlord, but they're all cooperatively working towards defeating this Overlord. So they have each other's best interests in mind, so it allows the players to take whichever cards they want. Okay, well I want this card, so I'm going to take this card, you want that card, and so I won't take this card and let you take that, and you can all get what you want and make your perfect weapon, but you have complete control over the journey track. The Overlord generally won't, unless there's some crazy card effect, they won't be altering the journey track at all. So you really just have full control over the journey track as a team. The whole game mode is just a very different experience from the base game. So it's not quite the same as just regular Enchanters. It feels like a fairly different game. So I do enjoy playing this Overlord game mode, but I find that overall I do prefer playing the Automa because it just feels like regular Enchanters. Whereas with this, it is kind of a different game, so I like having both, because if I want to play vanilla Enchanters, I can play with the Automa, and it feels very similar to me just playing with another person. But then if I've been playing that for a while, and then I decide, you know what, this time I want to try something different, then I can go play against an Overlord. It's a very different experience. So I like that. Overall, I do prefer the regular Enchanters game over the Overlord Pop solo mode, and it's not something that I always want to play, whereas I usually just want to play the vanilla Enchanters. So overall, I really enjoy Enchanters. I really like playing it solo as well as multiplayer. I do think that overall it is a slightly better multiplayer game than it is a solo game, but the Automa gets really close to the multiplayer game, and it feels very similar to a standard multiplayer game, but there are just some card effects that don't quite work when you're playing with the Automa solo, that do more interesting things in the multiplayer game. And then also the fact that there is no objective winning and losing in that game mode does put it down a notch, but I would definitely recommend Enchanters to someone who wants to play multiplayer as well as someone who wants to play solo. And if you get tired of the basic game, you can play a couple games of the co-op Overlord variant to get really spice things up and try something very different before diving back into the original game. So I'm going to go ahead and give Enchanters an 8 out of 10, and I would recommend you guys all check it out. If you have not yet watched my other videos on Enchanters, please go ahead and do so that you can see all the content that comes in the game when I unbox it, as well as how to play the game, and watch me play through the Atoma variant to really fully see how everything fits together and how everything works. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful for you in determining whether or not you should pick up Enchanters. If you did enjoy this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to MalStorm Gaming, and then hit that bell icon so that you're notified whenever I upload more content. And until next time, happy gaming!